back, and for quite some time I've been looking forward to our next guest, and quite an honor to get him today, so we value the time we have with him. Robert Tanenbaum is with us today, the author of over 33 books, including his latest title, which is The Day in Dallas. Lee Harvey Oswald did not kill JFK. There's a picture of the cover of the book. He's one of the most successful prosecuting attorneys. He has never lost a felony trial and convicting hundreds of violent criminals. He has served as Deputy Chief Counsel for the Congressional Committee investigating into the assassination of President John F. Kennedy and that of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. He's also served as 2 terms as mayor of Beverly Hills and taught advanced criminal procedure for 4 years. So quite the honor to have him today. Robert, good to see you. How are you, friend?
Well, good to be with you.
Thank you for your time. This is amazing. Well, a lot of this data has been released. What led you to go down this road?
Well, it wasn't anything planned, I can assure you, because the person who got me involved was Richard A. Sprague, who was the chief assistant DA in Philadelphia. And he was an amazing person. I never knew of him. I didn't know about his background. What I did know was that he was just appointed in October of '76 as chief counsel to the Select Committee, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and the HSCA. And he asked me to go to Washington with him and be in charge of the subcommittee investigation into the assassination of President Kennedy. You may recall that Senator Richard Schweiker, the Republican, had just reported back on the Church Committee, that is Senator Church's committee. He was in charge, Schweiker was, of the independent executive committee investigation into what the executive committee branch of the government, Article 2, was doing with respect to these assassinations. Keep in mind, the assassinations were culminated ultimately by Bobby Kennedy being assassinated in '68. And prior to that, of course, we had the president and Martin Luther King. So it was a terrible time with respect to dealing with our democracy. As people like to chat about, our democracy is in danger. What is in danger, in my judgment, is the fact that we're not taking seriously enough what is going on with respect to it. Because I hear all the time, take the investigation into the assassination of President Kennedy. The people say, why are we doing that? 62 years old. And I say, it's the single most important criminal case in American history, isn't it? We don't know who killed President Kennedy. It's not that Richard Sprague and I, who did go to Washington and work together, and by the way, were promised by the committee, the House Select Committee, that they wouldn't interfere with the investigation. And if they did interfere, we would resign immediately. It was not our committee. It was a congressional committee. I would have had a different opinion had it been our committee and we would have stayed on and fought the fight, but it wasn't our committee. That's important to understand. And then they pulled the plug ultimately 4 months after we started. But what happened was Sprague asked me to go to Washington. I had never known him. I was then in the DA's office in Manhattan. I was there for 10 years, right out of law school. And I was at College of Law School at Berkeley. I was probably the most conservative person who ever went to the University of California, probably still analyzing what's left of my brain. And it was a great experience to be at Cal because of not only by its reputation, but because I can assure you during the years I was there from '61 to '68, I was very, very, very sensitive to the notion that the teaching element at Berkeley, like many other places, was avoiding curriculum, but getting involved in personal philosophy, and which was not what their job was. And I never ran into that. I must tell you, to the credit of the faculty, and it was a great faculty, we were well prepared when we left from the point of view of being able to now slide into various positions, which many of us did. I went into the DA's office in Manhattan, where Frank Hogan, district attorney, was a legend. He was DA from 1942 to 1974. Elected every 4 years as a Republican, Democrat, a lifelong Democrat, conservative and liberal party person. So he had 4-party support for all those years as a DA of Manhattan. And it was strictly a meritocracy. And that's another great thing that I had lived through. It was never a situation of what should we do it politically or anything other than what is the evidence in the case, and how do we get from immutable facts the evidence. And what's interesting about it from my point of view is Sprague and I didn't do anything other than report basically what our findings were. We did that every day for 4 months, basically, to Lou Stokes, who was chairman of the committee. He was a lawyer, a very good man. He was a lawyer from Philadelphia, from Cleveland. And Lou was of the state of mind that he wasn't going to fight the majority in his committee. He told me that. I said, well, Lou, why'd you hire us? We didn't do anything here that's super special. We handled this case like we did any homicide case. And by the way, Richard Sprague is the only prosecutor who's ever tried to verdict more cases than I. And when I say tried to verdict, it's not a phony kind of argument to make or presentation. We didn't make up stories like a juror was sworn in the box, and therefore the case was on trial, as technically discussed. And the fact was that if the defendant then pleaded guilty, they considered that a jury trial. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is presentation, opening statements, jury selection, opening statements, cross, and everything else that's involved in trying a case up to verdict, and that has in summations to verdict. So he was an extraordinary person. The difference between the two of us was I was trained in this to do it by the best people, the two best people ever who worked in the DA's office in Manhattan. One was Mel Glass, who I did the book on, Echoes of My Soul, which I urge you to see. Echoes of My Soul became the Miranda case in Manhattan, and of course worldwide, of making sure that individuals would be given their rights, and the case would proceed by having people be Mirandized. It's the very least that we can do with respect to due process. It didn't make anybody soft. It didn't make anybody politically, more advantageous, and so on and so forth. Because what really has gone on, it was a question right at the beginning of the show of Marxist independence. Marxists now are becoming so-called independents. What a laugh that is. It's the left wing of the Democrat Party. All of a sudden, have become Marxist. What happened here? Well, we're sleeping, and all of a sudden we woke up, and the Democrat Party is no longer what it used to be, an important situational party. And I never dreamed that, of course, the Democrat Party, or rather the Republican Party, would become the party of the middle class. And that's what Trump accomplished in his 2 terms in office, it seems to me. But, why did it happen? What happened to this great party? And how did it become a Marxist, liberal, left-wing, independent party? Because it's a dangerous party now. Dangerous to the extent that all these independents, so-called independents, I speak and meet to and debate with and so on, which I enjoy, and glad I have the opportunity as I have right now. They're more honest than we are, because here's what they say: everybody lies in both parties. Therefore, we're independents. Really, where does that put you if that's the case? We're independents. We're more worthy, and that's nonsense. So it's a critical time with respect to the politics in the country, of course. But Sprague and I went down, and we had the commitment, and then it became apparent of certain things that had occurred. In the first week in Washington, I got a telephone call from Richard Schweiker, Senator Richard Schweiker, who was a member of the Church Committee, Senate Church Committee, and he said he would like to see me in his office. I said, sure. And I told him Sprague and I had no brief to come out of this thing one way or the other. It was all based upon immutable facts, as we both did when we tried cases. It was immutable facts. These are facts that cannot be refuted, and that's why, I was fortunate enough to have great detectives and prevail and try so many cases. I averaged about 2 cases a year, 2 cases a month, rather. You can do the math on this. Even if I averaged 1 case a month, I wasn't keeping tabs on how many cases I tried or did Sprague. But I knew working with Sprague that he was a giant in trying cases, an incredibly high integrity person who was very competent. But as I started to say, I was trained by the best in the DA's office, and that was Mel Glass and John Keenan. And when I was ultimately became head of the Homicide Bureau, where Keenan was my bureau chief, and then I was in charge of the criminal courts. Now, in charge of the criminal courts in Manhattan was an interesting phenomenon, We took in 250 new cases every day. That was from like 8 in the morning until 5 at night. We had 150 new cases, and of all sorts of varieties, right down from murder, right down from spitting on the sidewalk. And the evening was from 7 p.m. until the wee hours of the morning, 7 days a week. We arraigned, which is important. You wanted to have the defendant arraigned in court and not sitting around. For example, if he's arrested on a Thursday, for example, the defendant doesn't get to see a judge or a DA on Friday, whatever the reasons are, but that's generally the case. And Saturday, Sunday, the defendant's languishing in jail. And on Monday, a DA sees the case. The defendant's been in jail since Thursday. And the DA throws the case out. Well, what happened to those 4 days and nights that he had to spend in jail? I want to avoid that. You don't want to have fake toughness, is what I'm trying to say. Well, you want to have a case, you handle the case properly. You don't get involved in anything phony like that. So the bottom line to all this was that I spoke with Schweiker, and he said there are several things I must impart to you. So I'm in his office, and he said the first thing is, having investigated Article 2 of the Constitution of the Executive Branch, as I mentioned to you, Schweiker said he was shocked from the evidence that there was operational obstruction from members of the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. And that the real shocker, he said, was that from our investigation, we believed that the members of the CIA, some members of the CIA were involved in the assassination of President Kennedy. Well, when I heard that, I thought somebody put 10 gallons of ice water on my head. Here I am, 10 years of serving in the DA's office ultimately. Mm-hmm. And this is not what I expected. I expected just a straightforward discussion about what he found out and how he did it and so on and so forth. But it was stunning and shocking to hear him come up with those conclusions. And I thanked him for it. And he gave me his documents and so on. And then during the course of the investigation, I came across an interesting piece of American history, if you will. And that was in 1961, President Kennedy fired Allen Dulles, who was head of the CIA, because what happened at the Bay of Pigs. And by the way, when I say Bay of Pigs, I mean to say for those people who are a lot younger than I am, that this is not a personal criticism of a group of people in Cuba. It just happens to be the historical name, Bay of Pigs. And there was a strike that was created by Allen Dulles at the CIA to get rid of Fidel Castro. And the CIA was obsessed with getting rid of Castro, the communist leader of Cuba. Right. And so Kennedy then appointed John McCone, who was a very, very close associate of his, a lawyer. And McCone became head of the CIA in 1961 and wrote a note to James Rowley, who was head of the Secret Service at the time. And Rowley was concerned, as people in the government were, that they would find out, that the public would find out that Lee Harvey Oswald was involved both with the CIA and the FBI. Right. And that's something they wanted the public to know. We can't handle the truth kind of thing. We've heard that before. Right. Only certain people in certain committees can handle the truth. So what happened was McCone received a letter from Rowley saying that he was very concerned about the leaks that are coming out with respect to Castro, with respect to Lee Harvey Oswald, that his training was suspect, and that at times he would become very much involved operationally and with policy. So there was no specific oversight that was going on. And so what happened was McCone wrote a letter back to him, a document. And what he said in the letter was, he said, I too am concerned that this information in any way may be disclosed to the wrong persons. It might lead the media to erroneously claim that this agency, the CIA, and perhaps others, were directly involved in the Dallas action. The CIA referred to the assassination as calling it the Dallas action. And then he says at page 2 of this letter, this document, McCone does, and he said, this is in paragraph 6 of this 2-page letter. He says, while the persons involved in the assassination of President Kennedy were in the employ of the CIA, quite a statement to make in writing by the head of the CIA. And he says, as well as the FBI, it's impossible to maintain full 24-day responsibility over its operatives. And Dick Russell had written his book about this. He was an excellent researcher, Russell was, and he did a book called The Man Who Knew Too Much, and he mentioned this whole issue of the letter, the McCone letter, the addition here. And in '78, in the archives, I mentioned this because in the archives in '78, the letter was found.
Wow.
And it was found legitimately, and legitimately in both the sense of it was there, it was real, it wasn't made up. The government initially said, well, it's a fake letter. What more can we say? People are writing fake information.
Okay, so I'm over on a break. Let me take a quick break and let you come back so we can get this wrapped up. Let me say to our viewers and listeners, it's called That Day in Dallas. So there's a picture of the book by Robert Tanenbaum. There it is, a picture of the book. And we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back for his closing remarks. Okay, welcome back, and honored to have with us Robert Tanenbaum. He's the author of quite a few books. His law career is just pretty stellar, and his latest book is entitled The Day in Dallas. Lee Harvey Oswald did not kill JFK. There's a picture of the cover of the book. And Robert, for the sake of time, let me ask you a couple quick questions. One is that the file on JFK's assassination has been released along with other information. Does the releasing of that to the public underscore your research?
Well, first of all, I would not insult your intelligence, believe me, I just don't say that, by saying, isn't it great, the 80,000-page routine? Well, would it offend your common sense to suggest that the government's conduct had been so hideous in this case that, and I'll give you a quick example, that for me to say that there was anything left and that wasn't washed, cleaned, rewritten, all of which there's evidence of, that, say you testified before the Warren Commission and some people in the CIA didn't like it, they would change your testimony. This is information that has come across our desks and so on. And I asked to get a subpoena on this thing from Lou Stokes, and Lou said the senior people are not going to support you anymore. I said, why not? Why'd you hire us? Well, we never thought you would get to the bottom of this so quickly, this sordid mess, and do it so competently. I said, well, thank you very much, because one of the issues the government came down with was neutron activation analysis, NAA, neutron activation analysis. And they said this constantly, that now, because people are questioning our sincerity and our honesty, NAA is the principal testing component for comparative bullet lead analysis. That means, this mumbo jumbo means, that the government was saying we can compare a fragment to a fragment and a fragment to a bullet. And they never bothered. The problem with that is they never bothered to speak to any of the metallurgical PhDs, none of them, to the extent that it meant anything. And the metallurgical PhDs declared that this was an invalid science. But the CIA, but the people in the government were saying, if you don't believe NAA, this is literally what they were saying, then you believe the earth is flat. Ha, ha, ha. It's a big joke they were making the whole thing, except their science was invalid according to metallurgical PhDs. And so that was just one isolated incident of what the government was up to. And too bad for us, because they also, the House Select Committee, I knew was now organized now to tell the truth, but I didn't think they would lie so overtly, because on page 37 of the Forensic Medical Panel report of like August 78, the House Select Committee threw this little piece of information at the American public. And it was at page 37. I urge everybody to look at it, page 37 of the Forensic Medical Panel report. And it says in substance that the Parkland doctors, who are very important witnesses here, none of whom were called in any substantial way to the committees, these committees investigating the case. But the Parkland doctors must have been mistaken, said the House Select Committee on Assassinations. This happened after Sprague and I left. And they said because all the 26 witnesses at the autopsy at Bethesda, they never claimed that they saw the terrible wound to the president's head. Maybe the back of his head was blown out by the fourth shot that occurred at Dealey Plaza. And it blew his head out. But that's totally inconsistent, isn't it, with the whole issue of what happened at Dealey Plaza? Because what happened at Dealey Plaza was that at the stockade fence area, the president is shot in the front head, and his head snaps back. But the government's position was there were 3 shots that the president was hit with. One was a shot in the back that had a downward track. It was 5 or 6 inches below the neckline. And keep in mind, this neckline issue is something that the government was trying to use as a hole in the neck. The bullets passed through Kennedy's neck and struck Connolly in the ribs and fractured his right wrist, etc. All of which could not have happened because the bullet was a downward track, and the downward track was at 27 degrees, and you can't have a bullet that has a downward track at 27 degrees below the neckline rise, as the government argued, believe it or not. It had to rise 11 degrees going upward in the body. And that's what they call the single bullet theory, which is an insult to American intelligence. And it's totally invalid and absurd.
Let me ask you this. This is fascinating, and we're not going to get through it here with a few minutes I have left. This is fascinating. Your book is available, and it does leave us with the bad feeling that the CIA and the government was clearly involved. I think even some of the forensic pictures we've seen in the past, as horrific as they are, suggest that just wasn't a single shot from a 20-story building. Now that the book is out, what do you want the takeaway to be?
Well, the takeaway is, as I mentioned, in all humility, people who said, what a great job you did in Washington. I said, all we did was report what we found. It's there. It's not something that is secretive. It's not something that was done by so-called experts, myself and Sprague. That's not what happened here. What happened is we went to Washington. We started this investigation, as I said, the way we would any homicide, and we were stunned at what we learned. So why haven't other people have done that? And I said that to Lou Stokes. I asked to get these subpoenas from him. And the subpoenas I wanted, the information I wanted was it became important for us to find out, in fact, whether or not the CIA, in fact, had memos regarding its alleged participation in the assassination, or whether or not it was a rogue activity from someone in the CIA. And he wouldn't do it. The committee wouldn't give us the power to do that. So, of course, Sprague and I had, were forced to leave. That's all, we left. And because he said to me when he told me this, Stokes, in his office, I said, again, why did you hire us? And that's when he said, we never thought you would do this so quickly and so thoroughly. I said, well, he said, what are you going to do now? So I leaned forward in his office. I said, I resign effective immediately, and I'll be speaking to Sprague within the hour. And of course, within the hour, Sprague also resigned. But that is what has gone on here. In addition to which, there's powerful evidence that the shot that blew out the president's head at Dealey Plaza had, it's called minute metallic fragments. If someone were to shoot me in the back of the head right now, I would not have minute metallic fragments at the front of my head. It's that simple. And the reason I'm going through this is the government denies the shooting in the back of the head. Because how do you shoot someone in the back of his head and the head goes backwards? That's what the government's telling us about the single bullet theory. It's a downward track, and it's a 27-degree declination in the president's body, 5 or 6 inches below, we know from autopsy, below the neckline. So how did that bullet get out of his neck? The whole thing is an insult to the American intelligence, to the American public's intelligence. One last thing. Yeah, there's supposed to be oversight from the United States Senate. Right. You want to know what kind of oversight they had? The great Senator Schumer from Brooklyn, unfortunately, where I grew up. Not in his neighborhood, I can tell you that. Schumer said in President Trump's first term, when he said he was going after the executive intelligence agencies. Yeah. He wasn't going after him. He wanted to get to know what they were doing, because the whole Bay of Pigs was a fiasco. Okay. And that's why he fired Alan Dulles. the president did.
Right.
But Schumer, here's what Schumer did. Schumer said, the chief of oversight in the United States Senate, Schumer said, isn't it amazing that we thought that this guy Trump was such a clever guy? Well, you don't take on the CIA if you're clever.
Yeah.
And that's what happened, because there are 6 days from Sunday that they will get back at you.
Okay.
Imagine an agency of the government is getting back at us.
Sorry, Robert, I'm out of time. Let me say, get the book, That Day in Dallas by Robert Tanenbaum. There's a picture of the cover of the book. We'll get you back. Thank you for your time.